Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, page 106a. Starting from the bottom of 105b for context, the Gemara was asking, how does one remove a handful from this meal offering, which consists of both loaves and wafers? The Gemara answers that he stipulates and says, if I specified my vow that I would bring loaves only, or similarly, if I said that I would bring wafers only, let the handful that I remove from the loaves be for the loaves, and let the handful that I remove from the wafers be for the wafers. If I said in my vow that I would bring a meal offering that is half wafers and half loaves, let the handful that I remove from the loaves be for the half the loaves and half the wafers. And let the handful that I remove from the wafers be for half the wafers and half the loaves. The Gemara challenges this suggestion, but if the vow was to bring a meal offering that is half loaves and half wafers, it requires removing one handful from the loaves. And now we turn to our daily daf of 106 at the top. Menachot 106 with the words Umerakikin. Umerakikin, kokomitz mechalois harakikin, umerakikin achalois. And the wafers together. And according to the suggestion, he removes a handful from the loaves for the wafers and a handful from the wafers for the loaves. The Gemara answers, we have heard that Rabbi Shimon said, if one brought a meal offering that is part loaves and part wafers, and the priest removed a handful, and that which came up in his hand was only from one of the two types, either only loaves or only wafers, he has fulfilled his obligation of removing a handful. The Gemara asks, but isn't there a problem with the surplus oil? The Gemara on 75a states that if a meal offering is brought half as loaves and half as wafers, the oil is divided equally between them. Half is mixed with the loaves and half is applied to the wafers. The surplus oil from the wafers may also be mixed in with the loaves. But if the meal offering is baked entirely as wafers, the oil that remains is given to the priests. Therefore, Abaye's explanation of the Mishnah is problematic, because if the person said in his vow that he would bring half loaves and half wafers, one brings back the surplus oil and mixes it with the loaves. But if he said that the entire offering shall be wafers, the surplus oil should be eaten by the priests. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Ditanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, Moeshchan Kemin, Ki Umotar Hashemin Nechal HaKohanim. The Gemara resolves this problem according to the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, as it is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon that the oil of a meal offering baked half as loaves and half as wafers is applied as follows. One anoints the wafers in the shape of the Greek letter chi, and the surplus, which is an X, and 11 and 9 is 20 chi. It's gematria 20 if you do English letters. And the surplus oil is eaten by the priest. Consequently, the surplus oil of a meal offering baked half as loaves and half as wafers is used the same way as that of a meal offering baked entirely as wafers. Amar le Rav Kahana le Rav Ashi v'ho'iga l'sapoka b'minchas nisochim de Rava mitnadev adam minchat nisochim b'chol yoim. Rav Kahana said to Rav Ashi, if one specifies in his vow which meal offering he will bring, and subsequently forgets, why does he bring only 5 types of meal offerings? Isn't there room to be uncertain with regard to another type of meal offering, namely the meal offering brought with the libations that accompany various burnt offerings? This meal offering can also be brought independently as a gift. As Rava said, a person may volunteer a meal offering brought with the libations every day, if he so wishes. Ki mistapka le siman yachid biglal levoina belog mikamsa. The Gemara answers that there is no uncertainty with regard to the possibility that he said that he would bring a meal offering brought with the libations, because it is completely different than the other types of meal offerings. When one is uncertain as to which meal offering he vowed to bring, the uncertainty is only with regard to certain meal offerings. The Gemara presents a mnemonic for these differences. Individual, due to frankincense with a log, removes a handful of it. Ba biglal yachid, ba biglal tzibul. Lo mistapka le. The Gemara elaborates with the uncertainty with regard to which meal offering one vowed to bring is with regard to a meal offering that is brought exclusively due to the obligation of an individual, but one is not uncertain with regard to a meal offering that is brought due to the obligation of the public. For example, a meal offering brought with libations, which accompany communal offerings as well as individual ones. He certainly did not vow to bring this type of meal offering. Ki kamesapkale ba biglal atzma ba biglal zevach lo mistapkale. Furthermore, when one is uncertain, it is with regard to a meal offering that is brought due to its own obligation, but one is not uncertain with regard to a meal offering brought with libations due to the requirements of an offering. Ki kamestapkale teuna levoina sheina teuna levoina lo mistapkale. When one is uncertain, it is with regard to a meal offering that requires that frankincense be brought with it, but one is not uncertain with regard to a meal offering brought with libations, which does not require frankincense. Ki kamestapkale ba belog ba bishlosh eluin lo mistapkale. When one is uncertain, it is with regard to a type of meal offering that is brought with 1 log of oil, but one is not uncertain if it is brought with 3 log of oil or more, which is the halacha with regard to meal offerings brought with libations. See Numbers 15, 5-6, 9. Ki kamestapkale teuna kamitza sheina teuna kamitza lo mistapkale. When one is uncertain, it is only with regard to a meal offering that requires removal of a handful, but one is not uncertain with regard to a meal offering that does not require removal of a handful, which is the halacha with regard to a meal offering brought with libations. The Mishnah teaches if one says, I specified a meal offering of tenths of an ephah, but I do not remember how many I specified, according to the rabbis, he must bring a meal offering of 60 tenths of an ephah. According to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he must bring 60 meal offerings, each with a different number of tenths, from 1 to 60. Tanu Rabbanan, Perashti mincho v'kavati b'chli, echad shel esroinim ve'ein yodea ma pirashti, yavi mincho shel 60 esroinim, divrei chachomim, Rabbi Omer, yavi menachot shel esroinim, מאחד ועד 60, שהן 1,830. The sages taught in a Braita, if one says, I specified that I would bring a meal offering, and I established that they must be brought in 1 vessel of tenths of an ephah, but I do not know what number of tenths I specified, he must bring 1 meal offering of 60 tenths of an ephah. This is the statement of the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says he must bring 60 meal offerings of tenths in 60 vessels, each containing an amount from 1/10 until 60 tenths, which are in total 1,830 tenths of an ephah. Or 183 ephahs, or right? Didn't they say it last time? Anyway, Perashti ben Yodea Perashti ve'ezo mehen Perashti en Yodea kama Perashti yavi 5 minachos shel 60 esrainim she'ein 3 meyois divrei chachamim Rabbi Omer yavi 5 minachos shel 60 esrainim echad ביד 60 שהן 9,150. The Braita continues, if one said, I specified a certain type of meal offering with a certain number of tenths of an ephah to be brought in one vessel, but I do not know what I specified or which type of meal offering I specified, and I do not know how many tenths of an ephah I specified, he must bring the 5 different types of meal offerings, and each one must contain 60 tenths of an ephah. Wow, sounds like a costly mistake. Which are in total 300 tenths of an ephah. This is the statement of the rabbis. Yehuda Hanasi says he must bring 5 different types of meal offerings, and for each type he must bring 60 meal offerings, each with a different number of tenths from 1 until 60, which are in total of 9,150 tenths of an ephah. במות להכניס חולין לזוהר כמפלגי, רבי סבר אסור להכניס חולין לזוהר, ורבנון סברי מותר להכניס חולין לזוהר. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi disagree? Rav Chizda said they disagree with regard to whether it is permitted to bring non-sacred items into the temple courtyard. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that it is prohibited to bring non-sacred items into the temple courtyard. Therefore, it is necessary to bring 60 meal offerings of each type, as if one merely brings one meal offering of 60 tenths of an ephah in a single vessel, he may be in violation of this prohibition, as it is possible that he vowed to bring less than that amount, and the surplus amount is non-sacred. And the rabbis hold that it is permitted to bring non-sacred items into the temple courtyard. Therefore, even if the meal offering is of greater volume than necessary, it is inconsequential. Rava Amar L'Chuli Ami Asur L'Hachnis Chuli L'Azah V'Hacha B'Mutarev Rava said that the dispute between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is with regard to a different issue. Everyone agrees that it is prohibited to bring non-sacred items into the temple courtyard, and here they disagree with regard to whether it is permitted to mix an offering that fulfills an obligation together with a gift offering. Rabbanan Sabri Mutar Arif Chayv ben David Rabbi Sabar Asur Arif Chayv ben David. The rabbis hold that it is permitted to mix an offering that fulfills an obligation together with a gift offering, and therefore one may bring 60 tenths in one vessel and stipulate that the amount beyond his obligation will be a gift offering. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that it is prohibited to mix an offering that fulfills an obligation together with a gift offering, and therefore one cannot make such a stipulation. Every possible meal offering requires its own vessel. Concerning each vessel, he stipulates that if this one can fulfill his vow, it should count as fulfillment of his vow, and otherwise it should serve as a gift offering. Amar le'abai le'Rabbi Rabbanan de'ali mutal le'erav choyva b'nidav habe'inan shnei kemotzim dikamis v'hada gamid. Abai said to Rava, according to the rabbis who say that it is permitted to mix an offering that fulfills an obligation together with a gift offering in one vessel, with 60 tenths of an ephah can serve in part to fulfill the obligation and in part as a gift offering, there's a difficulty. Don't we require the removal of 2 handfuls, one for the obligatory meal offering and one for the gift offering? Rabbi answered, according to the rabbis, it is required as the priest removes a handful and again removes the handful. Abai said to Rama, but if so, since the tenths that fulfill an obligation and the tenths that are a gift are mixed together in a single vessel, when the priest removes a handful, isn't he removing a handful from tenths that fulfill an obligation to account for tenths that are a gift offering, and removing a handful from tenths that are a gift offering to account for tenths that fulfill obligation? The Omer kol eicha dematya yada the kohen hashta chova ulbesof nidava. Rava answered Abai, this is not difficult, as the one who brings the meal offering renders it independent of the intent of the priest, as he says, wherever the priest's hand reaches. Now, when he removes the first handful, shall be the location of the tenths that fulfill my obligation, and whenever his hand reaches at the end, when removing the second handful, it shall be a gift offering. Abai asked Rava, but how does the priest burn the handful upon the altar? If the priest will burn the handful from the gift offering first, how can he then burn the handful of the tenths that fulfill the obligation? Perhaps the entire meal offering is for the obligation, as the vow was to bring 60 tenths of an ephah, and everything apart from the first handful, including the second handful, is the remainder. And by burning part of it, the priest causes the remainder to be lacking. Yomar Mar Shiraim Shechasru Ben Kmitza Laktao Ein Maktir Klaimet Alehen. And the master said, with regard to the remainder of a meal offering that became lacking between the removal of the handful and the burning of the handful upon the altar, the halacha is that one must not burn the handful on its account, as it is not considered a valid meal offering. Alternatively, if the priest will burn the handful that fulfills the obligation first, how can he burn the handful of the gift offering? Okay, we'll stop here and continue on with the next Amud.